U.S. Congresswoman Barbara Lee began working on the Cuba issue in 1977, traveling to the island nation more than 20 times. A longtime opponent of the U.S. embargo, she joins us from Berkeley, California. Congresswoman, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
You have consistently opposed the U.S. embargo of Cuba, and that has not been a politically popular position in the United States. In fact, in 2009, Fidel Castro said that he admired you for your, quote, political courage for taking that stand. Why have you been such a strong advocate for normalizing relations for so long?
Well, it's very important that Americans have a right, or at least are able to exercise their right to travel. And part of that means they should be able to go to Cuba to make their own determinations whether or not they believe that the embargo should or should not stay in place. I just think it's a fundamental human right for Americans to be able to travel. Secondly, Cuba is an Afro-Hispanic island 90 miles off the coast of Florida. And we should have normal diplomatic relations with the country that close to our own country. And we should be able to engage in educational, scientific, trade relations like we do with other countries, Vietnam, China, every country almost in the world. And so why not Cuba? This policy, I have to just say, is over 50 years old. The embargo, it's failed. And so I'm very pleased now that the president is really moving forward in a very bold fashion to do everything he can do through executive order to end the embargo. But I've taken delegations down since '77. I want people to see for themselves the society, get to know the Cuban people, really be able to make their own informed decisions about Cuba, given, you know, the fact that they could not, you know, travel and see for themselves what Cuba society was like.
One of the big differences between the United States and Cuba is, of course, the issue of human rights. You know, as part of the initial agreement, Cuba announced that it was releasing something like 53 political prisoners. I want you to take a listen to what Elizardo Sanchez, she's with the Cuban Commission for Human Rights and National Reconciliation, had to say following last week's visit by the congressional delegation. Let's watch.
We gave Senator Leahy and two others a list of 24 names of Cubans in prison for political motives, some of whom have spent more than 20 years in prison, with a request that they make efforts by making use of this line of contact between the two governments to call for their release on humanitarian grounds.
Now, the United States says it did raise the issue of human rights. Cuba denies that, saying that it will not tolerate interference in its domestic affairs. Do you believe that Cuba is now ready to become a more, let's say, politically diverse society?
I have talked to the Cubans many times about a variety of issues, and I think the main issue is normal diplomatic relations so that all of these issues can be put on the table. Of course, Cubans have their own issues they want to put on the table. The United States has issues we must put on the table. And so this is going to be, hopefully, a dialogue based on mutual respect to really come forward and come to terms with some type of agreements that make sense for both countries.
The U.S. Assistant Secretary of State, Roberta Jacobson, who's leading this delegation to Cuba, she was quoted as saying at the outset of the talks, what we have to recognize is that we have to overcome more than 50 years of a relationship that was not based on confidence and trust. Where do you see the common ground between the two countries so that progress can be made?
Sure, and myself and other members of Congress, we've met with Roberta many times, and I'm so pleased that she's there, and she and Josefina, two women who really want to move forward and normalizing relations, recognizing how tough this is going to be. I think that we have a good framework to begin, but it's going to take a while. You know, there are going to be many tough issues that have to be put on the table. I mean, you look, Guantanamo's an issue that's going to have to be addressed. You know, you're talking about all the issues that involve normalizing trade relations. So we're talking about a whole range of issues that have not been discussed or negotiated in over 50 years. That's a long time. I don't think we have many examples of models and of frameworks for this to take place. But I'm confident that under this administration that it can be done.
Right, so the talks are underway. You mentioned the name there, Josefina. She is, of course, from the Cuban Foreign Ministry, Josefina Vidal. She is leading the Cuban delegation to these talks. This is what she had to say. She said it would be very difficult to explain that there has been a resumption of diplomatic relations while our country unjustly continues to be included on the U.S. list of state sponsors of terrorism. How big an obstacle is that? Cuba's still on that list.
Well, let me first say, members of Congress have written to the administration over and over again, asking the administration to lift Cuba from the list of state-sponsored terrorism. It doesn't make any sense. We should have done this before. And so I think it's very important, and I know the administration is reviewing this policy, but, you know, I'm confident that sooner or later that can be done, because that is, I think, a huge designation to be placed on along with Syria and Iran. And for anyone who has visited Cuba, for people who know Cuban politics and some of their foreign and military policies, I think they would conclude that Cuba does not rank on the list that Syria ranks on. And so I think that the administration needs to review this. They said they were, and they certainly, personally, I feel, should be lifted from this list. And other members of Congress have said that also. We've communicated this in writing even before the president's announcements. We believe this for years now, and hopefully that can get done.
So in a sense, are you saying that Cuba's inclusion on that list is unjust?
I don't know what the basis is. You know, we've asked over and over again why Cuba is listed as a state sponsor, a country that is a state sponsor of terrorism. I don't see the facts that warrant that, and you'd have to present to me the information to justify that. I have not seen that over the years. I mean, this just, again, I've been working on this for many, many years, and I have not seen enough information to convince me of that. It's just the opposite. They should be taken off, and they should be taken off quickly.
Now, you have a system here in the United States where the White House, the president, is responsible to a large degree for conducting the foreign policy of this country. But here we have an embargo against a country, which is actually United States law. That can only be changed by Congress. What are the chances of that being changed by Congress, given that there is some significant opposition there on the Hill in Congress to changing that?
I believe it's 63% of the American public believe that this is a failed 50-year policy, and the public wants this to happen. Members of Congress need to listen to their constituents and need to understand that we should support legislation, they should support legislation to do what their constituents want and what the public wants. This is in our national interest. It's in our national security interest to lift this embargo in Congress. And so no one thinks that this is going to be easy, but we have to build the public support. We have to build co-sponsorship from all of the legislation that will be introduced to lift the embargo. And I'm cautiously optimistic that the voice of people, that the democratic processes in our country will work, and that the public will weigh in a big way to let their members of Congress know that this is an unacceptable policy, that we should move forward, lift the embargo, allow people to travel freely back and forth to Cuba, while at the same time recognizing the challenges and the issues that both countries have with each other.
You know, you mentioned the embargo. Other than the embargo, which, as we heard the president say at the outset of this show, has failed in its purpose after 50 years to achieve what it was meant to do, what do you think has changed in the United States to warrant this new approach to the relationship with Cuba?
I think people are beginning to look at the world in a different way in terms of global peace and security, and can't understand for a minute why a failed policy would be put into place. People are becoming very involved and very aware of our foreign policy. Also, I believe that businesses are very interested in doing business in Cuba. It's a market that would help companies sell products to Cuba, but also create jobs in our own country. We can create thousands of jobs in a variety of sectors in America if, in fact, this embargo were lifted. So the business community, quite frankly, has really been pushing for many, many years to end this embargo. So it will benefit our economic recovery here in our own country and will create jobs, but also it will help the Cuban people purchase rice and other products at a lower price and really help their country begin to recover from many of the economic challenges that they have. So for me personally, when you look at it, it's win-win, recognizing that nothing's perfect and that we have to mount an effort to meet all of the challenges that are in front of us. But I can't see the Cuban people nor the American people losing from this effort. And I think that it's the right thing to do. And I think the public here in our own country can't figure out, for instance, why the problem with regard to returning Elian Gonzalez to his family and to his father in Cuba was a big problem. I think that was a critical turning point in our own country, where people became really aware of what this policy, unfortunately, has been for the last 50 years.
That's right. That was a young boy who was returned to Cuba towards the end of the Bill Clinton administration. Congresswoman Barbara Lee, thank you so much for joining us. We are going to take a break right now. Up next, we go to Havana and Miami for opposing views on U.S.-Cuba relations. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.